Those people that say they wait around for inspiration, it's like, oh shit, you're going to be waiting a long time. Like you got to go hunt it down and kill it.
Hello, print friends, and welcome. I'm your host, Miranda Metcalf. Each week, I chat with artists who use print-based media to do something beyond the expected. This is a bilingual podcast, so if you subscribe to us, you'll be getting episodes in English with me, as well as in Spanish with Ronaldo Gil Zambrano. Together, we speak to printmakers around the globe about their practice and passions in the world of printmaking. Hello Print Friend is brought to you by Speedball Art Products, currently offering possibly the best thing to happen to relieve printmaking, their Woodzilla presses. Beautifully made in the Netherlands, these uniquely engineered presses perfectly combine superior craftsmanship and performance at a price that makes them accessible whether you're a seasoned printmaking pro or new to the craft. Available across 5 sizes, each Woodzilla press is precisely manufactured from heavy-duty steel and designed to apply uniform pressure without undue work or stress for the artists, while still guaranteeing a beautifully printed result at every reveal. Check out these beauties through the link in the show notes. My guest this week is Kari Kristensen, a Vancouver-based artist and printmaker who is known for her iconic, bold linocuts of sweeping mountains and contemporary Canadian landscapes. We talk about growing up in a small town, how her background in classical studies influences her artistic practice, and why being gay makes her a better printmaker. So, without further ado, sit back, relax, and prepare to carpe diem with Kari Kristensen. Hi, Kari. How's it going?
Hi, Miranda. I'm great. It's a beautiful sunny day up here in Vancouver.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. Being from that neck of the woods, I know that those sunny days are precious.
Well, this is one sunny day out of 10 of rain. So yes, you are correct.
Well, thank you for tucking yourself inside to talk to me for an hour. Giving up that little sliver of sunshine, I know.
That little sliver of actual sunshine life, yes.
Yeah, vitamin D for sure.
Vitamin D.
Well, I'm really excited to talk to you today. I have admired your work for a really long time, and I just know that we're going to have a great chat about it. But before we get into all of that, would you please let people know who you are, where you are, what you do?
I'm Kari Kristensen. I'm in Vancouver, BC. In Canada, and I'm a printmaker artist. I kind of like, the older I get, the more I just call myself an artist and not a printmaker anymore. But I clung to being called just a printmaker for a while there because I thought it was a political statement.
Yeah. That's so interesting you should say that, because I think about that a lot too. And that kind of way that printmaking can be sort of like sliced out of the artistic pie and set aside sometimes. And even in the way I brand the podcast, I used to say I talk to printmakers, and now in the introduction I say I talk to artists who use print media, because I think that can get kind of tricky. And I think we're all, thinking about language and what things actually mean when we say them. And so it goes back and forth.
Yeah. I thought I had I think maybe it's possible that being so adherent to calling myself a printmaker put a little bit of a chip on my shoulder, in the art world, because in general, you stack it up against painting, and first of all, you're comparing the two media, which is really something no one should ever do. And then also, in the gallery world, there's still so much misunderstanding of printmaking. But I think so the chip on your shoulder gets to be no, I'm a printmaker. Don't use the word print that way. That's the wrong way.
Yeah.
Whereas, and then after a while, I figure I just let it go, because the more I get on in my career, I just spread the word of print by everything I do, whether it's in painting or printing. So
for sure, I think sometimes there's that sneaking the print into them, because as you say, people do come with so many misconceptions. And I've worked in the non-print gallery world, the broader gallery world for some time, and I'm always just smack my colleagues with love and annoyance when they say, so they also make prints, but this is their original work, or you hear that and you're just throwing pencils across the room at them, trying to hit them while they're talking to a client.
Like tiny little daggers hit my heart every time.
Every time. Yeah, but it also, I think it kind of bonds us together too as the scrappy people that we are. So I do like that too. Yeah.
But can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
How do you know about my work?
Instagram.
Instagram. Oh, I love the Instagram.
Yeah. I found your work quite early on when I was building the Hello Print Friend Instagram account, which at the time was the Pine Copper Lime Instagram account. And I knew I wanted to create a pretty robust Instagram platform just as a way to discover artists I wanted to talk to, but also as a way to be more accessible to artists I have talked to or artists who want to talk to me or listeners. And I think you were one of the first accounts that I followed when I was just 3 years ago trying to build up my little platform. So for you, if we can get a little bit more context for Kari, where did you grow up and what role did art play in that part of your life?
I grew up in Ontario, actually. I'm from a little tiny town just outside of London, Ontario called Dutton. It's one of those towns that it's like you're watching the Andy Griffith Show or something where it's like everyone knows everybody and people are on the front porch having lemonade kind of stuff. Yeah, that's Dutton. And for me, though, like the thing about Dutton is that it's in the part of Ontario where very close to Toronto, where the Group of Seven did all of their painting. Like, there's so few Canadian art movements that that the Group of Seven was the one that was closest to me.
Yeah.
So I was always aware of Canadian art. And then I also made it like it's a passion of mine to know about Canadian artists and to research them and to know about them. Ever since I was a teenager, I've really just been drawn to like the history of art in Canada in particular.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I think that there's some maybe crossover a bit for me when it comes to like the history of art and American art as well. You know, when I was going to grad school for art history, I kind of didn't really think much of American art. You were like, what is it? Some weird racist landscapes with no Indigenous people in it? You know, like, what is that? Like, what is American art? And then when I got there was a wonderful American art professor named Sarah Moore at University of Arizona, where I was. And the way she was like, yes, that can be what it is, but what does that tell you about what was going on? And the way that what I was sort of just brushing off as one-dimensional actually has a really fascinating history woven into it of colonialism and the ways that shifting perceptions of the natural world from, is it something to be feared? Is it something to be conquered? Is it something to be celebrated? All these different relationships we've had over time with the way we conceive of nature. And I ended up just kind of falling for it and eating my own words that I never spoke out loud, but I guess, eating my own bias that I had taken to studying art history and realizing that there's a lot of really interesting things to unpack, even in the history, before we get to kind of the exciting pop art or modernism or maybe things that people more think of more broadly when they think of American art.
I also had a similar chip on my shoulder for American art. But I think that for me, that brings up a couple of things. The first one I think about is, I mentioned the Group of Seven. Of course, that tradition, the Canadian tradition of showing our wild landscape was the thing that set us apart for a while. But then as I got a little bit older, there was a movement in London, Ontario called London Regionalism, which was a small movement in the Canadian art world, and not a lot of people know about it, but it's something I talk about a lot because I lived so close to it and I saw a lot of the art, and it was always in the papers and the news there. There was this artist that led it. His name was Greg Curnow. So I started out with this romanticism, the stars in my eyes, the Group of Seven, the way they want you to see the landscape, this love, this. And then I run into Greg Curnow. He's like the stumbling block who suddenly points out to me that, he brought the political into art for me, even in the Canadian art world. He started talking about the place that he was at and how that was just as important because, he was working in the 60s and 70s and 80s. But he was like, so comparing himself to the art movements in the States. And he's like Canada can't do that. So it talked about the difference between us. And he actually had quite a hatred for America. So it brought that thing to me too. First of all, the idea of regionalism and what you can say through art that no one else can say except for you. And then that whole putting it in a context into time and placing Canadian art into the world in a different way. And the other thing is, I don't know if you've watched this Netflix Andy Warhol Diaries yet.
Yeah, I have.
Because I wasn't a huge Warhol fan because he's so ubiquitous, right? It's just everywhere. But then you start peeling back the layers. The show starts peeling back the layer. And I've read the diaries. I have to admit, I didn't maybe I didn't analyze them as much as I should. But you start peeling back the layers of him and his queer life and New York at the time. And I would have to say I'm much more of a Warhol fan than I ever had been after having someone else point that kind of stuff out to me. And I'm sad it took Ryan Murphy to do so.
I had the exact same experience watching them. I just sort of watched it because it was like, oh, Andy, he's the printmaker that everyone thinks of when they think of printmakers, and I should be more informed. But I did have that brush off of like, oh, right, Mao, Marilyn, I get it, soup cans, like nothing means anything, haha. And it was so fascinating, particularly to see his life after that burning hot pop movement. And like his romantic life and his professional life and the way he kind of ebbed and flowed from popularity was fascinating.
Oh, I totally, and like when you look at like one of his artworks, and I would have seen the Paramount logo before, and I just would have assumed, he's referencing pop culture again and movies, and he's stuck in that world. I didn't realize that one of his lovers that he couldn't talk about worked for Paramount, so that's why Paramount appears in all of his artwork. But so that's a whole other snippet of information that just takes the art to a whole new place in the printmaking. It's interesting.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of like a broad lesson about art in the sense of there's really no way to kind of justify like the prejudices that I bring to it without actually diving into it, because there is always like so much more, I think. Yeah. And there is a reason why people have looked to art movements and looked to artists as sometimes problematic as they can be, to hold up something about the world at that time. That's significant for sure. But
like, if we go back to Little Me.
Yes.
Art didn't play a big role in my growing up life. Neither of my parents were artists, or like my grandmother painted for fun. So sometimes like there was this portrait of my mom hanging in our house that my grandmother had painted, and it was scarily good. She was pretty good at capturing the essence. So when I started doing art, I was always there. I was like, oh, you're a bit like your grandmother. She's artistic. So. But and I remember like once, like one of my first memory of doing art is sitting with my mom at the kitchen table coloring, and she was coloring so perfectly. I thought, I'm like, oh, one day I want to grow up and be just like her and color just that good,
Yeah.
So I always enjoyed doing it. But then I didn't take any art classes until later, like when I was later in high school. So it wasn't something that I gravitated towards straight away.
And so when did it kind of come into your life in a major way, and was printmaking running parallel to that timeline, or did that come along later?
I think like print came really fast. I think it's always funny, like when you're like, I just turned 50. It's funny when you're 50 talking about when you were in high school, but such is the thing. Hindsight. So the first time I took an art class, I know it's going to sound stupid when I say this, I realized I was super good at it. I could draw anything. I was just like, this is interesting.
This is latent superpower or something.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we pretty much like very quickly in Ontario. I don't know that I've talked to other people who were born and bred out here in British Columbia, and they didn't do the same thing. Like they didn't hand you the lino cutting tools at such a young age because they thought you might stab other people with them. But in Ontario, they just hand you the knives. So we did a lino print right away, and I loved it. I loved it. I still have that first one. I have every plate.
Really?
Every plate I've ever carved. I still have that one too.
What was the subject matter?
Oh my God, it was a heron, and for some reason I cut the legs off. I'm not sure why. I'll forgive myself.
Well, it was your first one, I think. I think we could have some grace for young Kari. Yeah.
And then I went to the University of Guelph, because at the time they had a really great art history program and a fine arts program as well. And I realized that having someone teach me art in university was not what I liked. I didn't like being in the art classes, and it wasn't for me. So I took it in my first year, and then after that switched to an art history degree instead. But I kept taking printmaking because there was a master printmaker there called Gene Chu. So I took printmaking from him when I was there. So I think I've always had that love of print, and in particular lino printing.
Can you speak to what it was about that process that struck you?
I get asked this question a lot, and it's one of those things that as an artist, you just like, after a while, it makes me think of that line from When Harry Met Sally, like, you just know, like, you know about a good melon, you know?
Yeah.
But because it's often like, it's the gateway printmaking is what I usually call it, right? Like, it's the first one they teach kids. It's a form, sometimes they start with a potato print, and then they move right on to lino printing, and then you move on to the, the more technical stuff with the acids and the baths and the stones and the screens and the film and the emulsion. There's something really uncomplicated about lino that appeals to me. I think, I don't know whether, like, I have a very clean aesthetic, like my house, my life, everything. And I think lino offers that clean aesthetic in a way that the other printmaking mediums don't for me. I've done them. I like combining lino with other things, but it's just, I don't know. A lot of people say, isn't it meditative? And it's like, absolutely not. It is not meditative cutting a giant sheet of lino and trying not to move. My work is a lot of straight lines. That is not meditative. That is hard work.
It's just like, I'm just imagining like anime, like sweat bullets, like,
right?
Yeah.
But I love everything about it. I love the smell of it. I love how it feels. I love the printing. I love everything about it. If I had to pick another print medium if I was to rank them in order of preference, I'd probably screen printing next. But there's a lot of shit involved.
There is. Oh my gosh, like emulsion and lights on and lights off, and yeah.
And a few years ago, like when I first had my studio here in the 1000 Parker Street is this big old warehouse building in Vancouver. That's where my studio is. I was doing a lot of lino combined with screen printing, which I still really enjoy, and I should go back to because I enjoyed it. But I was doing a monoserigraph, which I really enjoy. But I had a screen printing accident, a huge screen printing accident, where I had to spend like a few days in the hospital.
Oh my gosh!
So I've been kind of scared away from it for a while.
Do you have any, like, it's okay if no, but any kind of like cautionary tale to share with screen printers?
I was using the dehazer for one of my screens, and I put it into what I thought was a safe bottle. It was an industrial sprayer, like an industrial spray bottle.
Yeah.
And when I left it sitting over the weekend, I put it in there, I left it sitting over the weekend, came back on Monday morning, and I lifted up the bottle, and it had eaten through the industrial spray bottle, and it sprayed up into my face and into my eyes. And yeah, it was horrible. Horrible.
Oh my gosh.
If I wasn't wearing contact lenses, I would probably be quite a bit, like, have a lot more eye damage than I do.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. That's definitely a cautionary tale for sure.
Yeah, it was horrible.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's just the stripped down simplicity of lino, I can imagine, after having like a printing trauma like that. It's sort of like I can see everything that's happening here. There's no chemicals going on that need to be dealt with. It's just I keep the pointy end away from me.
Or wait, I try to.
You try to. This is best practice, to keep the pointy end away. Yeah. And yeah, you'll be okay for sure. Yeah. I want to talk a little bit more before we kind of dive into the meat and potatoes of the practice about you saying that you studied art history and also classical studies, I saw.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I connected with that because that's really my background as well. I loved classical studies. I couldn't get enough of it. Yeah. Just
like quote me some Homer and I'm in.
Exactly.
Like, give me the Aeneid on a beach and I'm happy, right? Like
I loved it so much. And I just remember just boring my friends to death at the bar after coming home after a really rousing session of talking about the Odyssey. And like, and you see the way the lines are actually formed, and they're just like, yeah.
I have a similar story too, but I think I bore my friends with me. I'll get drunk and I'll be like, "Do you know we're just repeating Roman art history over again?"
Totally. I get so passionate about it, and to the point where I loved even HBO's Rome. I don't know if you saw that, but like,
oh my God, I've watched it a few times. I love it so much.
So much. I've watched it with like all of the commentary on from the consultants that they had, and like, this is really Roman graffiti you see here, and so and I connect with it in this way that it feels, maybe kind of unexpected, considering like it's written by like all of these old guys a long, long time ago. And I think that maybe I find something, I don't know, comforting about the questions that they were going for about what it is to be a good life and what it is to be an honorable person are still ones that I'm interested in. But anywho, I guess I'm just kind of curious as someone who also loves that part of what humans made once. Hi, doggy. This is
that's Frida. Yeah, of the printmaker and her dog.
I feel like it would not be appropriate to have an interview with the printmaker and her dog without the dog making her presence known.
Trouble.
That's okay. She's like, bring it home, Miranda. Bring this question home. That's what she's telling me. I guess what I'm trying to ask is I'd be curious to know if that shows up in your work as well. I can see how the art history does, as you've spoken to your interest in Canadian art history, particularly the tradition of the landscape, of course, shows up in your work. Do you find that the classical studies side of things works its way into your creative practice?
I think it does for sure. I mean, because it informs who I am. And I think, like when you say classical studies, not a lot of people will know what we're talking about, I think. But like, their stories of old, their tales, their morality, ways to live your life, like stories of journeys and coming home and all those emotions, right? And then I think that makes its way into my work for sure, because I'm trying to, like, it's not strictly about looking at a landscape, it's about how the landscape makes me feel and how I think it makes you feel as well. So there's that aspect of it. But then there's also, I think I'm really passionate about like Rome and ancient Rome in particular, more so than Greece or any of the other ones, because of it. I think the clean lines and the way they set our culture up and things that we don't even know every day, we thank them for. They invented concrete, for God's sakes. I mean, where would we be in the world without concrete? But so if you're in the Pantheon, you just look up and you see that oculus that in the center of the Pantheon and the sun shining through and the perfection of design. It's just like there's this harmony with my soul, and I can't really explain it. It's just this incredible feeling and very clean lines. Arches, vaults, and domes, right? Like those are the kinds of things that find their way into my work.
And that repeating clean forms, now that you say it, it's not just like if you look at like the Colosseum, it's just all of these perfect arches that are just getting like smaller and smaller as they go up. Oh, that's exciting. Well, we'll have to have classical nerd out another time. For sure, because it is something that's, really near and dear to me. So I think this would be a great time to kind of talk about then, as you mentioned the fact that you do these, I was going to say meditations on landscapes, but you just were very clear they're not meditative, but like meditations in the art historical sense, where you're using really just like a binary of black and white and mark making and texture to create these explorations of contemporary Canadian landscapes, sort of with that tradition re-envisioned. I guess maybe kind of to begin with, what do you think drew you to that particular subject, and why do you think it's held your attention for the time that it has?
Yeah, first we go back to like my very first influences, which was the Group of Seven. And I often say that I am continuing a conversation that they started, but, they a bunch of white, rich, they were financed by a rich white man in the 20s making their work. And then you have, like this queer woman making contemporary prints doing the same thing. So it's a very different conversation, but I think it's one that's worth having.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been thinking a lot about contemporary landscape and making landscape relevant, because I think as we both kind of spoke to, sometimes people can bring a prejudice, particularly to traditional landscape, of it just being like, oh, it's those things in the museum you walk past on your way to the Warhols, right? But there's something really fascinating to me for artists who can re-engage with that tradition and make it relevant.
I think it's even more important now, considering what we're doing to the environment now, at the precipice that we're at, trying to bring us back to that a little bit, to that talk about landscape and to talk about the world around us. I hope in a way that my work does that in a tiny bit, right? Makes people feel that way again.
Mm-hmm.
Can we have a landscape renaissance?
Yes. And I think that's something that we lose when we brush aside landscape sort of glibly, is that I think even the landscapes that we think of are more historical and traditional, they of course were political as well and agendaed as well. And we don't necessarily engage with it that way because we're just like, that guy just liked a sunset. And it's like, did he though? Or like, what is in that landscape and what is lacking from that landscape?
I think you can use it as, for sure, you can use it as a vehicle for conversation. And I think that's the way that we were talking about the Warhol, where you're thinking about layers of work. That's something that you maybe wouldn't think about when you first looked at it. You'd be like, oh, that's a nice, pretty red sunset that's happening. You wouldn't realize there's a political statement behind that. Mm-hmm. And I think it's like in some of my works that I created in the last couple of years during COVID, there's one called Forest of Peaks, for example, and it's a forest. It's, a forest. I'm doing air quotes. You can't see me with my fingers. Uh-huh. And there's one bright tree in the middle. And for me, it was talking about how you're alone in a crowd. You're basically, during the pandemic, that was very much the way that I felt. Very alone, but still in a crowd. So using landscape in that way, sure, you can look at it and you can say that's a forest and the sun's hitting that one tree, or that wasn't my intention. Its original title was Alone in a Crowd, but I changed it. Yeah. To be a bit more subtle.
Yes. We've really have this distinctive developed aesthetic. And I know that a lot of young printmakers and a lot of students listen to the podcast. And I think a lot of them are in that process where they're trying to discover their voice and trying to discover what moves them and what they can spend years reflecting on and in a visual language. Can you give any advice how you found it, or maybe how someone else might go about finding something that really feels like theirs?
I think, again, I'm going to mention my age. I just turned 50, and it took me a while to realize to come up with maybe and realize that I had something to say that was different than what I'd seen before. I really hate when people say there's nothing new, because I just think, well, then let's give up. But no, I completely disagree with that. I think there are new things. I think what I'm doing I've never seen before, and maybe that's hubris on my part. I don't know, but I'm not interested in what a mountain looks like necessarily in real life. I appreciate it. Seeing it on a canvas, I very much appreciate them in real life, but seeing exactly what a mountain looks like, I think that's been done. Mm-hmm. So I think the thing is to realize, to come up with how, I'm more interested in how that mountain makes you feel. Like, I'm more interested in your interpretation of an event. And I think part of the thing is get off Instagram, for God's sakes, and stop looking at other people's work, because I've seen people copying me quite a bit, and I get it, because everyone does that when you're learning. You copy other people. That's how you figure it out. But it's that time alone. It's that time trying to figure out what it is that, you have to have something to say that is unique. So find what that is.
And it sounds like that there may be the external impacts can kind of be signposts along the way, but it's actually what is in you that's going to give you that answer in the end. And it's not the external stimulus maybe so much. Yeah.
It's not easy to be an artist, right? It's not easy to be a successful artist, one that does it just full time. It's not easy to do that. So cautionary, you have to have a trifecta of things that all work together, like the passion to do it, the charisma to do it, and the talent. You have to have all of those things to make it work.
It always reminds me of this great thing that Ben Moynos said, which was that if it was just talent, that made people successful, none of us would be here. Because there's so few people who are the most talented, right? We should all thank our lucky stars that there are other elements like hard work and networking and charisma and grit that actually make success, because otherwise it would just be completely to get a little bit Roman, where the gods just kind of sprinkled that inspiration, like what you were just born with. Yeah.
And those people that say they wait around for inspiration, it's like, oh shit, you're going to be waiting a long time. you got to go hunt it down and kill it,
I love that. See, I feel like that's the kind of pep talk that all young artists need to hear. Yeah.
Well, and if you had told me in my 20s that I'd be making a career now focused on the Canadian landscape, I would have been like, no, that's ridiculous. But the seeds were definitely planted, right? These are, I don't know. You end up where you end up.
Absolutely.
And when you get there, because you have a reaction to it. And then I remember the first print I did in this series sold very quickly, and I was like, oh, interesting. What's happening here?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the interesting things about having that relationship as a maker who shares, and a maker who shares not instantaneously, but quite quickly. Like that we live in a time where we can get almost instant feedback on what we create, which of course can be brutal and maybe not necessarily super healthy all the time. But if you're someone who likes that kind of instant gratification, it can also be really interesting. Yeah. I'm wondering if we could speak to, the particular, almost like the form in your image making, and how you've got this really developed aesthetic where you're just using the black and the white and the peaks and the valleys. And yet you seem to have this ability to create a plethora of super interesting, dynamic, different compositions, just using that visual language. And I'm wondering if you could kind of speak to your process of actually creating the composition, and if you find that ever limiting, or is that kind of stimulating in the limitation?
It's a giant question.
I know. So we've got another half an hour of recording time. So yeah.
No, it's just that stripped down aesthetic. The first thing I'd say is that stripped down aesthetic is a very deliberate choice on my part. Like I have had color, and before as I said, I've combined the screen printing and the lino, but I think like in the most recent work that I've been doing, it is very stripped down to just that aesthetic choice of black and white, or sometimes blue and white, like a single color, because I think there's a lot to say with line. And I think I'd have to go back to like a trip I did to New York, and I went into the MoMA and I saw this Jim Dine print called The Braid. And when I looked at it, I was like, oh my God, that's a print? I couldn't believe it. Like it was just so three-dimensional to me. Like it just jumped out of the page. It just looked, you could see the hair coming off of it. For me, I was a little bit shook in that moment. I was just like realizing the possibility of print, right? And then I thought, well, his was of course an etching. I'm like, well, how can I do this in my own work? I need to make this work pop off the page in a way. So then I came back with all this like renewed energy, and I started doing this whole series with ropes and with linocut. And then I that series made me realize the power of line and how I could like just shove some shadow and light in there, and in particular in the ways that I carve. And so, and that kind of all flowed into this current series, which is, all line and shadow. And I don't find it limiting, I think, because if I get to a point where I feel like I'm repeating myself or I don't have anything new to say, then I'll switch it up and do something different. Right. But I've got a lot to say and just a little bit of life to do it in. So I'm going to keep doing it until I change it again. I think in the last couple of years, the work it keeps evolving, of course, as it should, but it keeps evolving in a way now. Like I mentioned, that piece that was inspired by the pandemic. I think like using landscape, not just to talk about how you should feel about landscape, but about other things as well. So and that way there's endless possibilities and endless combinations. Yeah. And the variety of textures and depth that you get from just, as I said, this like the binary, the limited palette, I think that's maybe part of what makes the final compositions just so mentally and aesthetically stimulating, is that you're just like, what? Because you can really look into it and understand what the impression is given. And then, of course, I think the viewer has this natural curiosity of like, how'd she do that? I love it when people, like, the work looks good on my Instagram page. It does. But when you see it in person, it has that little bit of warmth, and you can see a few mistakes because you can see the human element in the work. But I like the illusion. Like, I like people sometimes mistaking it for digital because I enjoy that. Yes, like it's done by a human hand. Human hands can do this. I like that idea of the work. But I also like, I just keep discovering more ways to impart that shadow and the light and to move things around. It's just like this constant discovery, which is exciting. When I was doing a little research on you a bit more in depth in preparation for this, you have a line in, it might be your about page or maybe it's your artist statement that's one of my favorites of all time. Uh-oh. Which is, she is also gay, which she thinks has made her a better printmaker. Yeah, it's true. Which I love that so much. I guess it made me think of the fact that I know printmaking better than anything else, but I feel like printmaking is just a wonderfully queer medium. And I just think
want all wonderful young queer printmakers to hear that. Why is that making you a better printmaker?
No, for sure. I think it's important just to, I don't hide it. I can't hide it. You look at me, I'm obviously gay. Like there's no, the jig is up. Hey, you know? Did you know that when gay people go to an airport, like particularly lesbians, we have this thing called the butch nod. Have you heard about this?
It just in airports or just...
Almost always, like sometimes sometimes out in public too. If we're in a place where we both know we're gay and it's a place where it's not cool to be gay. Like I'm talking like downtown Istanbul. Once I got the butch nod. I fucking love that kind of stuff. Anyway, sorry.
So I love that. Yeah,
I think it's like important to
secret society. Yeah,
it is, and it makes you feel part of a secret society. Anyway, so that's an aside. But I think it makes me a better printmaker in a couple ways. First, it was something that made me feel that like I should hide it, and so it was always this thing where, you know, I spent a lot of time alone, basically drawing in my room and painting and stuff. Just like, and it was just like, it forced me, I think in a way, I was alone a lot more often and worked on my talent and worked on my skills, which I think has made me a better printmaker for sure. The other way is because I grew up in the 70s and the 80s, and it's not the same as it is today. I mean, not that today's definitely better, but it's still not easy to be a gay person in the world all the time. But I developed like a very serious form of OCD. I have something called arithmomania, which means I count and trace things all the time in my mind. When I'm talking to people, when I'm looking at them, all the time. It's just something, the first thing I do when I wake up is like count the windows in my bedroom, for example. And so it's this very structured, ordered way that my mind puts itself at ease. No one really knows why things are the way they are, but I think it's in reaction to, you know, the stuff that happened to me in my youth, feeling, because I knew I was different from a really young age. So it's like, you know, RuPaul says, you find that thing, like I'm quoting RuPaul now, it's the vast, we go from Roman art history to RuPaul. But you find that thing that people say that they use against you and you turn it, that's your superpower, right? So actually being gay is my superpower in a way, because that very structured way of thinking, like that's the way that I see the world. And that comes out in my prints for sure. For sure. That the line work, the disarticulation of things like that, it's all there. The counting, it's all in the work. So yeah, there. Very long answer to, and she's gay.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think it does speak to the way that art has such a beautiful long tradition of being that savior for people who are in a place where they don't feel safe and they don't feel seen. There's a reason why people are like, oh, you know, zany artists, right? And that kind of like idea of an eccentric artist, of course, goes back to Michelangelo, who was gay as heck, super gay, you know, that need to release the pressure of not feeling safe and accepted and seen or fitting in or that, which of course, like we're social mammals and we need community to feel safe. That's just inherent within us, is that I need to feel there's another ape around here who's going to help me look for that lion, right? And that's really, really intrinsic. And so releasing that kind of pressure of feeling like you don't have that through art is such a long and beautiful tradition. And why, again, while it's sort of cliche to say, that idea that like art saves lives, because it does. It absolutely does. Yeah.
Because, you know, instead of, you know, being just that gay girl at school, in high school, that got yelled and spit at a lot, I was also, hey, but man, she sure can draw. Have you seen? Or, oh God, she gets good grades. I wish I got those grades, right? Like that, those are the kinds of places where you find your niche and then you save yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm hoping that in the time we have left, I just want to make sure that I have so appreciated that you're now doing also outfit of the days on your Instagram. Because,
well, I'm trying to have fun with Instagram.
Yeah. It's so cool. It's sort of like, oh, what's Kari got on today?
Oh man, wait to see what I'm wearing today. I wore it for the podcast.
Oh, really?
Yeah, totally.
I'm excited. I will look for it with bated breath. Yeah, because it's just I just really think that that's just such a wonderful little look into your day-to-day life, but also just kind of that idea of the ways that we express ourselves, you know? And it's like, I feel like I've for years been watching this artistic side of you. And then all of a sudden I get to see like style Kari too. So that's just, I want to throw that out there.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So will my girlfriend.
Yeah.
She takes the photos.
They're beautifully shot, you know? Absolutely. Absolutely. And then I'm curious about your Instagram handle as well. That's the printmaker and her dog. Frida shows up here and there. But was she just a studio dog? Is she your companion in this making? Is that how she ended up looming large in your Instagram legend?
Well, I mean, the carefully curated Instagram at the beginning was just dogs. Who are we kidding? It was just like dog photos. And then I was like, wait a second. Because at first I don't think I took Instagram very seriously as an artist. It was mostly like a social media for, you know, keeping in contact with people and looking at pictures. But then I started realizing, well, you know, wait a second, I can use this for my career. Let's ride this wave as long as it lasts, like a wave in Hawaii. But yeah, she is. Yeah. The original dog is actually a dog named Doodle, who was the same kind of dog that Frida is, because I got sucked into the rat terrier life. The dogs are with you through thick and thin, right? So.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I think that we could definitely draw a parallel to that dogs save lives too, you know?
And you know what's super interesting is that I now belong to a group on Instagram. We call ourselves the Doggy Inkers, and we communicate with each other. There's another one in British Columbia, but they're like all over the world. There's a few in Australia, and we have this, and we're all like printmakers who have dogs, and that's our thing in common. So we have these conversations with each other about ink and paper and all sorts of random shit, and then we send each other dog photos. So it's this interesting community that we've made.
Oh my gosh, that sounds like my heaven.
It's just, and you know, we swear that we're all like, when I go to Australia, you can bet I'm going to hook up with some of those people for sure.
Yeah.
When we're talking about traveling the world, and one of the things to do is to seek out print places. I remember like when I was in Cuba, have you been there?
No, I've actually, Ronaldo and I have applied for a grant to go. So fingers crossed. We want to go try and do some studio visits there with printmakers.
There's a printmaking facility there in Havana, and it blew my mind, the quality of the print work there. And again, like talking about, you know, regionalism, saying stuff about where you are politically, amazing work. And it's when you see it other places, it's just this instant connection.
Yeah. That's such an incredible gift of being part of this community. And part of the reason why I started the podcast is because I was working at Davidson, and I was traveling internationally, and I was meeting just the best people around the world through printmaking. And when I left, I said, no, I need to keep talking to printmakers. Like I can't be without it.
You're hooked.
I got it. I am. I'm hooked on the print chats. So that's, you know, kind of grown into its own beast. But yeah, it's a huge gift. So yeah, for sure. In the time we have left, I want to make sure that we have a chance to talk about your mural work, because I've been seeing that pop up on your Instagram, and it's always so interesting when artists take print, which is that small, that intimate, that handheld medium, and then also have this huge public display of their aesthetic as well. And it's actually not super uncommon. Erica Walker does it. And of course, Joy of Killjoy does it as well. And I've been seeing you do it. And it's just always so thrilling to see when a printmaker is making this jump. And so I'd love to hear how it fits into your practice for you. Oh,
I think it's really interesting. It makes me think a lot about how we consume art these days. We're talking about galleries and shows and things like that, and how they're they almost feel a little outdated at this point. And I think as our culture evolves, it's about having art in places that is unexpected. And one of them is murals. The other one is like, sometimes I'm using my art for more commercial projects. I have this stand-up paddleboard with some of my art on it, for example. So people are out on a lake and they are standing on top of this, you know, stand-up paddleboard that has like one of my prints on it. And it's amazing, right, to be out there, like actually part of the environment. And at first I thought it's weird to have your art on stuff like that, but I think the way that life is going, that's how art is being taken in by people. And it's just. And I had to let go of having your art on the stuff and realize that that's how people are seeing you. That's how people are connecting with you. And then they'll come back and circle back to the work that's on paper. But I think the important thing about me, again, is not that I'm a printmaker. It's that I'm an artist and I'm very passionate about print. So that's why my mural work I try to make it look very similar to the print work. And most often, like almost every mural I've done is an enlargement of a print I've already done, because I want it to stay very connected to the work. But it's a way of getting the word out there. And I think my style is distinctive. And I think so when people see the mural work, again, they're wondering what is going on here. And, I'm hoping to put that little question in their head, and then they'll go back and look me up and realize, oh, okay, she's a printmaker. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I started doing murals just kind of as a side way to make money. And now, I've got them lined up for the summer pretty much. So they're a really good way to make some money.
I have heard that from other printmakers as well, is that, and I think that there's something about a lot of print processes that do have that kind of graphic quality to them that does translate to a mural, which is going to be read close up and far away.
Well, but what about the freedom too, right? It's the freedom, because we're limited by the size of our press for the most part, unless you hand print, right? But we're limited by the size. So the freedom to be able to do something 70 feet tall in a downtown Vancouver building, a print that big, technically it was a print, because I still it's important for me, right? Here goes my printmaking politics. All my murals they're still technically prints, because I tape them all off and spray paint them, so they're stencils.
They're stencils. There you go.
I go through sometimes, the one that's 70 feet tall, I went through almost 50 rolls of tape doing it. So it's really quite something. And it's just a different way. It's just a different way. It's just a different muscle to flex. It's something, and it's a way to get out in the community, all work and no play, right?
Totally. And I think that that's really significant too, is that it's such a public act of art making. And while printmaking is social, often people will go to community shops, it still is behind closed doors. And there's still that kind of barrier to entry of knowing about it and feeling comfortable in the space. But when you start making your art truly out in the world, that's got to be an amazing feeling that people are seeing it in action, seeing its creation, who might never have encountered art making in their day-to-day life.
Yeah, that's a lot of fun. The last time I was doing a mural, it's the first time that someone's actually brought me a bottle of wine while I was working. I'm this doesn't happen nearly often enough.
For consumption there?
They drove by and handed it out of their sunroof. They're like, good job, here.
I love that.
It was awesome.
I love that.
We don't often get tipped as artists,
Yeah, totally. That's really funny. I hope that, we maybe weren't having it up on the ladder so much, but yeah.
It's an interesting way to engage with community. And I think you don't do that in your studio either really very often, unless you have a community event. It's a really interesting way to engage with people.
Well, you said that you're lined up for the summer. Are you going to be traveling at all? Do you want to give a shout out to any cities that people, the mural tour that someone might want to say, hey, come see my print shop? Well,
I've got some big ones going on in Vancouver, but I will have one in Seattle this summer. So
lovely. Excellent.
Yes. Yeah, I'd like to do more international murals. So I'd like to see how we'll see how that goes. That's my next on my wish list.
Oh, that's great. Well, we've got a pretty international audience, so I would say consider it shouted out that you're open for chatting about it, it sounds like.
Absolutely, yeah.
Oh, very cool.
And then I'm also, the other project that I'm really excited about that I'm working on right now, I'm actually working on a deadline this weekend for it, is for the Dragon Boat Society of Vancouver. We have these dragon boat races that started here in the year that Expo 86 started, I believe. Anyway, so you'll be seeing my prints on dragon boats this year. A specific print that tells a story about dragon boating and its history.
That sounds lovely. Looking forward to seeing that. And definitely let me know when you're going to Seattle, because I know a lot of print folk in Seattle, having cut my teeth in the hard print world there 10 years ago. But I think that just, more community is good community, and I'm sure that they'd be happy to welcome you. Where do you know where you're doing the mural? I'm just curious because I know the city so well.
I can't say it yet.
Okay.
Sorry.
No worries. I feel like now you're just folding in drama to it, so this is great. This is stay tuned, print friends.
Totally.
Absolutely. Well, I feel like that's the perfect segue into asking you, where can people stay tuned? Where can they find you?
People can stay tuned and watch my work on Instagram. I'm one of those people that doesn't plan my Instagram. it's pretty live. I pretty do it. I finish a print and I put it up there pretty much. There's no careful calculation on my part. So yes, definitely Instagram, the printmaker and her dog, and my website. which is always kindly updated by the better half of me.
It is important to have those in our life who kind of even us out. Yes.
Who have different skills than us, and that's perfectly fine.
Exactly. Well, that's great. So yeah, you can find the printmaker and her dog, and you can also see what I personally hope to be the ongoing outfit of the day series. Which is just a wonderful little icing on the cake of just good print media. I guess just thanks so much for talking to me. It's been really fun. And like I said,
this is a great conversation. I've done a few podcasts, and it's just that I enjoy that we talked a lot around print as well. Like we didn't talk specifically about, all of the imagery and stuff, but I enjoy that we talked about all the stuff around the life that makes the print happen, because I think that stuff is really the meat and bones, and you really got to it.
Oh, I'm glad. And that's part of the reason kind of why we ended up rebranding, which we're talking about a little bit off the air. So like the Hello Print Friend is that I'm interested in what supports the printmaking. Like, what's that life? Because that perfect print that's mounted and hanging on a white wall in a gallery is such an end point in a way to a whole experience and a whole life and a whole practice, as you say, that supports it. So I'm so glad that you were keen to talk about it all. And definitely, let me know your travels, and
for sure I'll stay in touch.
Cross paths in the future somewhere. I'm sure we will.
Thanks, Miranda.
Thanks so much, Kari. Have a good afternoon.
You too.
Bye. If you like today's episode, we have a Patreon where you can help us keep the lights on and get bonus content like Shop Talk Shorts with our editor Timothy Pauschak, who digs deep on materials, processes, and techniques with our guests. Also, if you've listened this far, you might just be that special kind of print friend who would leave a review for us on Apple Podcasts. It would mean the world to us if you did. No joke, it really does make an impact in this podcasting world. And that's our show for this week. Join me again next week when my guest will be Nick Ruth. Nick is known for his multidisciplinary print practice exploring science, signifiers, and communications. In this episode, we both put on our amateur existentialist hats and talk about the ways in which communication brings us closer together and divides us. We also talk about the strange autonomous power of signs, different street crossing cultures, and how his curatorial practice is an art practice. You won't want to miss it. This episode, like all episodes, was written and produced by me, Miranda Metcalf, with editing from Timothy Pauschak and music by Joshua Weber. I'll see you next week.